Hello everyone. So today we would be undergoing or seeing the configuration agenda for Concur, which consists of request module configuration and expense module configuration. So in request module configuration, we'll have the configuration of the request header form, which we configure in forms and fields. After that, we'll have the segment types. Segment types consists of the airfare segment. Also, it has the segment forms and fields, which Concur has provided a standard list of fields for the form. If there is any modifications needed, we can modify that also. Along with that, workflows. Workflows is something related to the approval flow, once a request is submitted, so it has to go through an approval, right? So custom workflow approvals can be built. So there are 4 types of workflow, like simple one-up workflow, cost objects. If there are different cost object owners, then we can have cost object approval. Then there is authorized approvers, and there is grandfather approval, where there is more than one level of approval of workflow. And if it has go to the manager and go to the HOD, and after that the HOD is manager, then you can set up a grandfather approval workflow. Also, email notifications. Email notifications is something when an expense or a request is raised by an end user. So a notification is sent to the approver, so that he gets in his Outlook, and he can come back to the Concur instance and he can log in. So this email notifications also is modifiable. Then there is allocation. Allocation is something where you are cross-charging to more than one cost objects, like cost centers, internal orders, and WBS. So we have to configure that. Then request policy. Request policy is something which holds all the entities together. It is like a bridge which connects the request group, and it connects the forms or request header form, segment types, workflows, email notifications, and allocation form. All these forms are allocated to the request policy, and this request policy is assigned to the group, and the user is assigned to that request group. So once he creates a request, so he would be seeing all these configurations in his end user screen. So this is about the request. So coming to expense. So expense, it consists of cost object hierarchy creation, where we create a connected list in Concur, so that we can import the cost objects like internal orders, WBS, and other cost objects from the financial system. The financial system might be S4 Finance, as well as if there are any other systems like Oracle, so we have to build a custom interface. So we have to build it through SFTP. But if it is S4 Finance, then we can create the cost object hierarchy using native integration, or ICS. ICS is Integrated Concur Services. So next, if there are any other lists like business purpose lists, then we have to configure in list management. Next comes the group configurations. Group configuration is like creating the groups, based on the number of countries. Groups, it is mainly dependent on the number of countries it's implemented, or like it forms the base. So if there are 10 company codes, or if there are 10 companies, so if all of them have different configurations, then we have to create 10 groups. So it's like the base. Next comes to the employment forms and fields. Employee forms and fields is something where we capture the Concur employee data. So first we need to create the forms and fields, based on which it's like the base, where we create the base, and we hire Concur employees on that forms and fields, and we create the data. Next is payment types. So payment types is like how the employee, while on his business trip, pays. So it can be through cash, or it can be through company card. So company card, it consists of 3 types: IBCP, CBCP, and IBIP. IBCP is individual billed company paid. CBCP is company billed company paid. and IBIP is individual billed and individual paid. So we can configure all these types of payment types. Next is policies. Policies is something similar to request policy. It holds the expense approval workflow, the expense types, the expense entry forms and fields, allocation forms and fields, and all together. So approval workflow is something similar to request workflow, but this is for expense. So there are, as I said in request, there are 4 kind of workflow, like simple one-up line manager workflow. Next would be the cost object workflow. Next would be the authorized approval workflow, and next would be the grandfather approval workflow. Also, workflows is something we can modify like to any extent, and all the types of workflows is configurable. Next is expense type. Expense type is the claim type. So if expense type, for an example of expense type is hotel, airfare, all are these are expense type. The different types of claim types is called expense type. Accounting codes, it is the GL accounts which we have to map similar to what is maintained in the financial posting, so that the posting happens properly. So, and this ledger accounting codes are mapped against each expense type. Next is expense entry forms and fields. So this hotel, it has the details of for example, if you consider an expense type hotel, it has fields like transaction date and all. So that is configured in expense entry forms and fields, and this is also modifiable. Allocation forms and fields. So if an employee is cross-charging an expense to different cost centers or internal orders or WBS, or is cross, then we have to configure. We have to configure the allocation forms and fields so that an end user can see and select the different allocation. Audit rules is something which stops an expense type from submitting if there are any deviations from the company policy. So we can handle that through audit rules. It's like stopping an expense type from being submitted or putting an audit on that expense type, or so that it is controlled. Next would be email reminders. Email reminders is something an approver receives when an employee submits an expense report. So we have to configure the email reminders. Next would be car configuration. Car configuration is something related to mileage reimbursement. So consider an example, if a company reimburses an employee based on the number of kilometers he has traveled, then we have to do car configuration. And travel allowance. Travel allowance is something like the per diem allowance which the company pays. This configuration we have to do. There are 3 types of travel allowance configurations. One is generic, and one is time band, and other one is date of time. VAT configuration. If a company decides to reimburse or take back or apply for the tax to be reimbursed back to the company, then we have to configure the VAT. Next is cash advances. Cash advances is something a company pays an employee before a trip. So if an employee requests for a cash advance, then we have to configure the cash advance module. And cash advance module consists of cash advance form as well as cash advance workflow. Done. This is like the configuration agenda what we would be discussing as part of the training.